coming up for another one of our family photo seed packing adventures, and I've come up with a new kind of picture I want to take. Can you think of what photographic opportunity only is there for a few hours each day on the coast? Tidal pools. And so apparently it's bad to stake high quality electronic gear into salt water. And so I need a way to get into the tidal pool to see this world of rich color and variety. There's crabs, anemones. And for years, I've been dealing with the reflections off the surface of the water. And the way to avoid that, obviously, is to put the lens in the water. Now, you can spend $5,000, $6,000 on underwater housings and things, but I'm going to do my own hack and we'll see if it works on this trip. First, let's talk about some of the kinds of photography that we'll be doing. A tide pool is a depression in the rock that, as the tide goes out, leaves a pool of water. And these are deep enough to support whole ecosystems of crabs and anemones that sit there the whole time. At high tide, things are being washed in and out, so there's a lot of nutrient turnover. The tide goes out, suddenly they're being baked by the sun. So the organisms there are amazing. They have to deal with massive fluctuations of flushes of nutrients, of temperature. Suddenly when the tide is out, they're available to predators. So really cool communities. And so they're pretty small and well circumscribed. And like I said, you've got a surface of water to deal with. The good thing is they're shallow, so light can get in there pretty well. The critters in there are pretty small, and so what I'm going to be using is a macro lens. So macro lenses are lenses that allow you to focus very close to your subject so that the size of the subject is almost exactly the same in reality as it is on your camera sensors. So you get a lot of rich detail. So this is an example. This is a 105 millimeter macro lens. They come in different lengths. Normally, as usual, I'll have a polarizing filter on there, which will get rid of a lot of the surface reflections. But it doesn't get rid of is all the crap that lands on the surface, like pollen and bits and bobs of feathers and pine cones and things like that. So again, what I'm hoping is to be able to get this inside the tide pool and eliminate all that surface stuff and get in even closer to some of the creatures in there. So what do we need? So first thing is we need something for the lens to look through. And so what I have here is, I don't know, that's probably 5 millimeter thick polycarbonate extrude. This is a bilingual channel. So basically plexiglass. And you can buy this at any industrial supply place. They're actually pretty cheap. They come with these coatings on them, which is really nice. You can draw on them and it keeps the surface crystal clear. I mean, we have to accept that we're going to be shooting through another layer, not of glass in this case, but plastic. But this is what's the lens is going to see through. So we'll do all the cutting and things like that through this and then peel off the layer at the end. The housing that I'm going to attach that to will be made of just regular plumbing PVC pipe. So I've cut a section here just to show you. So we'll cut out a circle of the plexiglass, we'll glue that to the pipe, and the lens will fit inside. And as you can see, now this particular lens is an inconvenient width. This is 4-inch piping. It doesn't come in 3.5 inch, and so I've got some play here. So what I'll end up doing is using some foam and gluing them in as bolsters just to hold the lens still. So my vision is that'll go into the water. The buoyancy of the lens cover will hold the lens against it like that. The foam will hold the lens centered. I'll be on a tripod with the camera and me kind of holding the whole rig stable, looking either through the viewfinder or probably at the LCD screen that I can position in a more comfortable position. We'll see how that goes. So to connect the plexiglass to the PVC piping, there's a special kind of glue that is for acrylics. And what it does it's a solvent cement, meaning it will melt the plastic to each other and then it reforms and bonds itself. So it forms a really, really strong and waterproof bond. As a belt and suspenders approach, as these things are not cheap, I'll also use just a weatherproof sealant on the outside as a double layer of protection. To cut the PVC pipe, this is how it comes, as a big length like this. When it comes, the ends are nice and square. See, like that. And when you cut them, this is the edge that you get. If you can see that. But as you cut it, it creates a lot of friction and it melts it. And so it's a really rough edge. So what I would do, or what I would suggest, is keep this surface preserved for the one that's going to bond to the plexiglass, and use the cut one, and then you can sand that down and buff it for the part closest to the camera. And finally, so I've got a reciprocating saw to cut the pipe. This is what I have. I'm sure there are more elegant tools. Probably a bandsaw would be a really nice way to do it. And I've got a jigsaw to cut our circle. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so the first decision to make is, do you mount the lens, the plexiglass lens, inside the ring or outside? And my helpful teenage colleagues just pointed out that this is nice and flat and a fairly wide bonding surface. It's going to be much easier to cut out. It gives me a lot more freedom in terms of jiggly lines with the jigsaw and way less sanding. So, and then the water pressure will also hold it against the body of the cover as well. So I think that's going to be a nice way to do it. So first thing, I'm just going to trace this again on this cover. And like all of my projects, the good thing is it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, many would say that's probably a main feature of many of my projects. As long as it works, you know. And now I know that I can cut and use the line as a guide. I can cut outside the line. And if the plexiglass sticks out past the edge of the body of the lens cover a little bit, I don't care. I'm sure the crabs don't care. If you care, you could sort of sand it down. Okay, the cutting part. Okay, so I've cut out my admittedly rough disc. This will be my lens. And then it'll bond with, again, the acrylic glue onto the end of my tube here, like so. And then the camera lens will be looking through there. All right, next step will be figuring out how long of a tube I want to fit my lens. And I don't want it flush like this. It'll just get in the way with the camera and some of the buttons and the grip and this and that. So I'll probably make it, you know, what's that, 4 or 5 inches long, just to give me a bit of working distance. Okay, so you can see here, just a trick, if you're gonna use a saw, like a handheld saw, I use some painter's tape wrapped around to give me a guide for the cutting, so it's not all wavy. This is probably a 2-person job unless you have a set of bomber clamps, because this really vibrates around. All right, so we'll do that part now. All right, so in theory, gravity is always taking this straight down. So in terms of getting a non-slanted wrap of tape, if I straighten that out and try and keep it steady, I should just be able to roll the pipe and get essentially a straight wrap. Wait for it. Boom, look at that, awesome. so we've got my cut that I use the reciprocating saw for, a little bit uneven, but that'll be the camera end. And now I've got my factory nice even cut on the other end. I've got my disc of my plexiglass and my acrylic glue, and like most of my projects, a good supply of nitrile gloves. And so I've sanded the surfaces, I've smoothed out any burrs and things, I've sanded the inside so it'll take the glue from my bracing foam a bit better. So now all I'm going to do is remove the backing on one side, put a bead of the acrylic glue on the tube here, join the two, and clamp them for a few hours, ideally 24 hours, but it'll be tight enough that I can start doing the bracing foam a little bit later. So let's get on with that now. There it is. Nice clean surface. So that's ready to go. Trying to keep the dust off it. And now the gloves and the glue part. Do this part. So there's a little bit of glue scooching out inside, but that's okay. Like I said, we've got a lot of room between the actual camera lens and the plexiglass lens. So now, instead of clamping in different places, what I'm going to do is kind of build a little tower so it's a much more even pressure so that we make sure we get good seal the entire way around. So I'm just going to build a little thing here, use some wood, and then a handy object, another thing I tend to have handy for all of my projects. And we'll just let that sit, providing a nice even pressure, and we'll give it a few hours and see how we do. So while my lens is attaching itself to the tube, I figure I can cut some of that foam to sort of figure out what kind of blocking I need to hold the lens steady inside there. I should have warned you about the nails on the chalkboard sound, sorry. All right, so we've had some fixture time here, so it's holding together. So now what I'll do, this will take 24 hours to fully bond, but it's dry now to work with. So now I'll put some sealant around the outside here. And the nice thing about doing it this way as well is we get to leave this protective cover on the plexiglass until we're done working with it, which is awesome. I've also pre-cut some little pieces of closed cell foam that I'll glue inside, and that'll act as a bolster for the lens. Okay, so gloves on, sealant first. All right, so I've got a bead of this sealant around here, and I'm just kind of giving it a push gently to smooth it out. Hides any slight imperfections that I might have had with the cuts, but also just, you don't want any air bubbles in there. And the other thing is, you don't want any on the surface, otherwise you'll never get the coating off the plexiglass. So I'm just making sure I don't have any sealant holding that on there. So we have hopefully chemically bonded the plexiglass to the tube, forming a watertight seal. We're now adding an outdoor sealant to the outside, the belt of suspenders part. Okay, we're about 24 hours since we assembled this. We've got our plexiglass thing on the outside that I've left the protective sheet on for now. We glued it with the acrylic, and you can see on the inside here, I've glued in some foam, some closed cell foam, will help stabilize the lens inside. And then we applied the sealant around the outside. So before obviously sticking it into seawater. Let's see if it leaks. So what I'm gonna do is fill it with water, and the water pressure will hopefully ooze through any leaks that are there, and I'll leave it on this absorbent towel for a couple of hours, and we'll just see if any wetness shows up. And if not, then I'll put some protective tape over the seal here to protect the seal just from banging around on rocks, and we'll take it out and we'll give it a whirl. All right, let's see. Moment of truth. All right. So I got some drips on the outside. Those don't count as leaks. All right. Looks good so far. We'll see what happens. Okay, well, here we are out on the West Coast. I've got my macro lens on my camera, my tripod, our trusty device that I'm going to use to pop into the water to look through. As you can see, there's water around. This is kind of a rocky shelf where the tide is receded, leaving lots of little tide pools around, and I'm hoping I'll be able to find some interesting anemones or corals or sea stars or crabs. We'll just see what's out there. It's a sunny day, and so the reflections are quite intense. You can probably see it in the water around me, and that's the nice thing about this. This will get us under the surface, away from the bubbles, the reflections, the wind. There's quite a bit of wind you can probably hear. And hopefully things will be a lot quieter and a lot more conducive to some photography. The other thing I have is a reflector, and I'm going to use that instead of a light underwater. Some of these things are pretty small, these tide pools. I might just sort of use this to send some more light into really shady overhangs and that kind of thing. Batteries not needed, pretty handy for being out here in the wilderness. So I'm just going to kind of poke around here and see what I can find, and we'll see what we get. Yeah, no, a rogue wave comes in here, it's screwed. Okay, so I found a pretty good tide pool here, and I'm going to use this basically as a window through, and now I'm putting it on and I'm shimmying it around. There are a few air bubbles, so I'm kind of getting rid of those, and I'm having a look through, so no leaks. I think it's ready for the camera. We'll give it a whirl. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm gonna drop it in, and I'm gonna take a movie so you guys can see how it looks as it enters the water. You can see right now, a lot of reflections and things. So let's see what happens as we drop in here. Being really careful, of course. Beautiful. Okay, one anemone, no reflections, no crap on the surface. Oh, I got a little hermit crab right here.
He looks great. I don't know if it's a he or not, actually. Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. So it's so fun looking around in these things for little kind of vignettes. You know, hermit crabs running around, chitons, sea anemones. Oh, I see another hermit crab right here. Oh, he's got blue feet. So many cool things. Oh, what is that? Yeah, something going on down here. Oh, that's a big crab. Oh, and fish. Check this out. Look at his eye. He came out for a look, but then ran away. Still pretty fun. Spend hours doing this, of course, till the tide comes in. You can see all the ripple here. And then, boom, gone, amazing. I'm trying to get this urchin, but it's kind of close. That's not bad. There's really no adjustability though, that's the only thing. But pretty good for a first try. No sea urchins were harmed during the filming of this episode, by the way. Guaranteed. Sorry, coming through, sorry. Ooh, ah. Okay, maybe one. This is a cool starfish, and he's got his little feelers out, as well as his tube feet, which is how they move. This is why you have a macro lens. It's cool. Amazing. So the whole skeleton is made of water, giving it pressure, and then they extend these little tube feet and feelers. That's cool.
Okay, here we are back in James Thompson Photography Central, and I thought I'd do a little wrap-up about our little friend here. Overall, I think it was a good proof of concept. It allowed me to take this out to the rugged West Coast. It's relatively small, light, easy to transport, so those are some advantages. There are a couple of things I think I might modify in the future, though. It turns out tide pools are quite shallow, and I was using a 105mm focal length macro lens. That really magnifies things, and I think in a perfect world I'd probably have a bit of a shorter focal length for that particular kind of photography. For flowers, insects, things like that, it's great, but for that kind of thing, maybe a shorter focal length would be helpful. The other thing I was thinking is what I could do is use the lens hood of the lens like this, and what this does, it gives me this much more removal from the subject and therefore a bit more of a pulled back feel. That might help solve the problem a little bit. That also segues into the second issue that I found. It turns out the clear lens, I'm just seeing if I can get the light to reflect on it for you. The clear lens is, the particular kind of plastic I used, very delicate and easy to scratch. And in fact, the end of the macro lens scratched the plexiglass almost immediately, which isn't a big deal. It won't show up in the pictures. But what I was thinking is if I put the lens hood on, let me see if I can show you, instead of here, now I have this much more removal, and the lens hood obviously is a much bigger diameter than the end of the lens, and therefore the scratched area on the plexiglass is much more removed. So that's another modification I would make. I think I'd make the tube long enough and the diameter big enough that I could put the whole lens in there with the lens hood on. That gives me a bit more working distance, and also the scratching on the plexiglass part is nowhere near the field of view of the actual lens itself. Now you could say, well, why not just build a much longer tube? But the problem with that is if too much tube extends past the end of the lens, then you're going to get some really serious vignetting in your picture. So you need the lens really to be the same distance as the lens hood is away from the edge of the plexiglass. Overall though, pretty cheap, pretty portable, a reasonable thing if you're not going to go and buy bulky, purpose-made underwater photography gear. Now, from a field use point of view, there are a couple of things. You probably noticed in the video it was a really windy day, and so there was a lot of shake and noise anyway. But even underwater, I was using it handheld most of the time. I thought I could use a tripod, but the tide pools are so intricate and small, and you saw the little crevices. It's very, very difficult to get the whole thing rigged up like that. One thing you do, I mean, they make tripods where there's a center column that you can take out and turn horizontally. That's one thing, but again, to futz around doing all that and then your little crab or fish moves, it'd be pretty tricky. I think ultimately if you're doing that kind of thing or wanting to focus stack, you need to do it in an aquarium. So the technicality of getting it in there was somewhat difficult, and what that did is it forced the shutter speed and therefore ISO up higher. You could mitigate that a little bit by using the reflector that we saw in the video to get more light in there. That's one thing you could do, but generally you want pretty high shutter speeds, both due to your underwater, and that cuts the light, and your hand holding, especially 105mm focal length. And that's somewhere where a shorter focal length might also be a bit more forgiving. Okay, so that's it. That's the wrap. I hope you have fun experimenting with your own versions. You know, it's worth a go. It gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of image quality and things like that, using your fancy camera instead of a purpose-built underwater point and shoot. For some though, that might be the idea, especially if you're traveling a long way. But anyway, it's all about fun, so you get out there, enjoy, and let me know how you do. Bye for now.